on an item not contained on the agenda. No one has signed up for public comment today. A quick note, we are going to switch the order of the agenda for the committee reports and talk about outdoor amenity text change TC121 before we talk about missing middle text change TC520, which will have a little bit more discussion with it. Without objection, I will change the order of those agenda items. Okay. Starting off with the consent agenda. The consent agenda is a list of requests that can be acted upon in one motion. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. Staff has completed review and has delivered the items to the Planning Commission to be deferred to a future meeting. All of these items will return on a future agenda to be discussed fully. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. Commissioner McIntosh?
I move for approval of the items on the consent agenda.
I'll second.
We have a second? Second from Commissioner Mann. So we have a motion on the table to approve consent by Commissioner McIntosh and a second by Commissioner Mann. Since this is not a final vote, I will ask for a show of hands for all who support the motion. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Okay, on to the committee report. The text change committee met twice in May to discuss text change requests. As I mentioned, we are going to talk about item D2 first. That is TC121. This would modify the outdoor amenity area regulations. This item was discussed at the May 11th text change committee meeting, and the committee has recommended approval. I would like to ask if the text change chairperson has any comments to offer, or if you would like to make a motion.
Yes, I'll make some comments. Thanks, Chair Fox. So again, we talked about 2 text change amendments in our May sessions. The first text change I'll talk about before we move to the second one, and we'll hopefully get a vote and get this moved out before we talk about the second, was TC121 Outdoor amenity areas. This text change was voted 5-0 unanimously at the May 11th meeting to recommend for approval. This text change will amend the 10-part UDO to modify requirements for outdoor amenity areas. Specific changes include allowing for covered amenity areas in the DX district, outdoor overlap of the amenity area requirements and streetscape requirements past property lines, and larger green stormwater infrastructure dedications. So I'll entertain a motion, or I can make the motion now. So without further objection, I'll make a motion to approve TC 121. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated 5/21 contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment with specific with specific policies and placemaking UD 4.1, UD 4.8 private sector and public space improvements, noting that this action is reasonable in the public interest because this text change will amend the UDO to modify the requirements for required amenity areas. Also, updating the standards will allow for more flexibility in design and produce more and better products, particularly in the DX district.
Thank you for your motion. I see a second from Commissioner O'Haver.
Second.
Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? No? Okay, so we have a motion from Text Change Committee Chair Commissioner Mann, a second by Commissioner O'Haver. I will ask Chinitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Morning. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman.
She may be having some technical issues. Mr. York, in that case, how would you recommend we proceed?
Let's get a vote from everyone else by roll call, and then we'll go back to Commissioner Lampman at the end. And I'll ask Ray in the interim if he can reach out to her to see if she's having issues.
Thank you, sir.
Here. Commissioner Mann, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
Commissioner Raines,
Aye.
Vice Chair Winters.
Aye.
Okay.
We will hold on announcing the outcome of that vote, as we have one commissioner who hasn't voted. Per my tally thus far, we had 7 voting in favor. We have another commissioner who's on the line, if you'd like to record your vote as well.
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. What item on the agenda is being considered?
The item up for vote right now is TC121, which is for outdoor amenity. The motion on the table is to approve it as it came out of Text Change Committee. Motion by Commissioner Mann and seconded by Commissioner O'Haver.
My vote is aye.
Mr. York, as we wait for that, can we move forward on the agenda and just return to register the vote and the outcome of that particular item?
Well, she's technically left the room because we can't reach her. So you can go ahead and log the vote as 8-0 and then move on to the next item.
Thank you, sir. The motion passes 8-0. Going back to item D.1, TC 520. This item was discussed by the Text Change Committee. Standards related to residential development to allow a wider range of housing in more residential districts. This request was discussed at the May 4th and May 18th Text Change Committee meetings. The committee recommends approval of this text change with some modifications. The committee recommends the following changes to the ordinance: reduction to minimum lot widths for the attached housing type, reduction to the minimum lot width for the townhouse building type, removal of the corner lot width standard for all building types, removal of the transitional protective yard requirements for townhouses in R6, clarifying language that would allow open space to satisfy the rear site boundary for townhouses, clarifying the 4-foot garage setback, and clarifying lot width and site width standards for 2-unit townhouses. I would like to ask if Text Change Committee Chairperson, Commissioner Mann, has any additional comment.
Additional comment that I'd like to make is we voted unanimously 3-0 at our last meeting, May the 18th, to recommend approval. I won't go into any of the specifics, as I think you did a great job of that, and the materials are outlined in the agenda materials today. So I won't go into specifics, but I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed text amendment as it is consistent with the relevant policies in the comprehensive plan, and approval of the proposed text changes relevant and reasonable in the public interest based on these policies. LU 2.2 compact development, LU 8.1 housing variety, and 8.10 infill development, policy H 1.8 zoning for housing, and policy H 1.1 mixed income neighborhoods.
We have a motion on the table from Commissioner Mann. Do I have a second? Commissioner Bennett?
Second.
Thank you. Any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? No. With that, I will ask Commissioner McIntosh.
So reading the proposal from the Text Change Committee, I personally thought it sounded, I'm in agreement with the proposal. However, I'm very concerned with the lack of public outreach and the lack of, it feels like this is going through without engaging the public in the way the planning department has engaged the public in the past, for example, with putting together the UDO and comprehensive plan that included a lot of public input. It just, it doesn't feel as transparent as those former efforts, and I'm having a hard time deciding whether or not I can support it because of that.
Thank you for your comments. Would staff like to address some of the public outreach that's been completed for this particular text change?
This is Justin. I can speak a little bit to that. This text change was put on our text change portal, just like all text changes, and we left it up much longer. I think about 3 to 4 weeks longer than we do with typical ones. We created a website specifically for missing middle to define it and to talk about the issues and to list the proposals. We did conduct a Ask a Planner session virtually, so where we invited members of the public to attend, and it was well attended. So, you know, we tried to do some additional outreach. We recognized this was a pretty significant text change, and there was, you know, more than what would be typical for a text change was conducted here.
Vice Chair Winters.
Thank you. In conjunction with Commissioner McIntosh, while I do appreciate the outreach and all the efforts that have been bestowed, with it being such a significant text change, my only objection, as I have voiced before, is that this should have been heard in committee of the whole, since it is so extensive, as we have heard other measures, so that this could be reviewed by everyone and not just the text change. So that is my comment. Text change committee. Thank you.
Are there any additional comments from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox.
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman. Commissioner Mann.
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh.
Aye.
Commissioner Miller.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver.
I'm going to vote aye, but I would like to also comment that we had a lot of conversation about the minimum lot sizes, and I know we've attached a statement with our recommendation. But I've got some concerns about the minimum lot sizes for attached units. I'm not sure we've done enough to make that attractive. I believe Durham is closer to a 1-to-1, and so I just would like to make sure that we're paying attention and the recommendations we're putting forward are really making a difference in what we're doing. So I'd like to see us consider those minimum lot sizes for attached units be decreased. But in light of that, I'm voting aye.
Commissioner Raines.
Sorry, aye. It's a train.
Vice Chair Winters.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to new business items. There are 6 items listed under the new business portion of the agenda. These requests have not appeared on a previous planning commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and an applicant presentation. The first item is case number CP321. This is a staff-initiated request to modify language in the comprehensive plan related to economic priority areas. This amendment would provide clarity to the policy language and how the economic development priority areas are mapped. I would like to ask for a staff presentation from John Anagnost.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Fox. This is CP-3-21 to update the priority areas for economic development map, ED-1, in the economic development section of the comprehensive plan. And so the revisions that are proposed here are to update the map with the most recent census data so that it is up to date. And then also there was an additional criterion that was requested by the City Council. And then there are some existing criteria that just in the past, the explanation of the map in the document has not been completely clear. So the reason that this map exists is to identify areas of Raleigh that would benefit the most from new investments in private economic activity. And then based on that information, it can be used to guide programs within the city government. The most common use being the economic development grant programs that are operated by the Office of Economic Development and Innovation, and as with assistance from the Urban Design Center. And you will see the map cited from time to time in rezoning cases. So the criteria that exist today for an area to be included in this map are: one, if it has a high level of poverty and a high level of non-residential zoning. And so the definition of high poverty for that purpose is greater than 150% of the city overall level of poverty as percentage of households who have income lower than, or individuals with income lower than the poverty level. And then the second criterion is if the zoning of the area is more than 40% industrial. And then City Council added a third criterion about 2 years ago where they could choose areas to designate as well. And so when we look at those, what they don't show is that since this map was created when the comprehensive plan was originally adopted, it has always included redevelopment areas in Raleigh. And so those are areas that are allowed by state law for the city to designate and to take action to relieve economic blight. So underinvestment and poor maintenance of areas of the city can create redevelopment areas. So the city did that pretty extensively in the 1990s and early 2000s for areas east and south of downtown. Those areas have always been included in this map. They just weren't listed in the criteria. So the revision is to add that additional criterion, clarify how the areas are designated, and then to add the areas that are, to remove areas that no longer meet the criteria based on more recent census data, and then add areas that have been added by annexation. So this is a specific text. I'm not going to read through this, but if you have any questions, this is available if you'd like to look at it in detail. And so to go back to the map, there are 3 block groups that would no longer be included in the map because the populations in those areas, the incomes have increased to the point where they no longer meet the criterion of being high poverty or being adjacent to a high poverty block group. And then there are 2 very small areas in the southern part of the city. You can see those in the pinkish purple color, where those are part of block groups that were already included in the map. And those block groups remain in the map, but those areas were added to the city by annexation. And so those need to be reflected in the map. So this request is consistent with the comprehensive plan in terms of policies that relate to investment in revitalization and in prioritizing those initiatives for areas that have the greatest need. And you have until August to make a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. The city is the applicant with this request and no one else is signed up to speak on this item. I'd like to open for questions and comments from commissioners. And I will start off. Mr. Anagnost, you did mention this, the primary purpose of this map. Can you tell me in a rezoning case?
Yeah, it can be used to I'm showing that I'm having good internet connectivity. Are you able to?
You're getting a little bit choppy.
Rezoning cases, typically the way you would see that is if there's a request from a district that allows no non-residential uses or fewer non-residential uses, there's a proposed district that would increase the range or the amount of square footage of allowed commercial uses, that this map might be cited to say that that could be a benefit in an area that historically has an indication that economic investment has been lacking or not similar to other parts of the city. And so that might be a reason why allowing additional commercial uses is a benefit to the area.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments from other commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Chair Fox. I'm generally supportive of this. Excuse me. I just have a couple of comments. I have one concern about, I guess, the way these are done. I'm not sure if there is another method of determining the economic development priority areas. My concern is with using census tracts. It obscures poverty sometimes. And that jumped out at me when I was reading through the staff report and I was reading about the three areas that were removed because the incomes in those areas had risen. That's also could be a sign of gentrifying. So you have higher income people moving into these previously high poverty areas, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that would make the incomes come up. It doesn't necessarily mean there aren't still concentrations of high poverty in those tracts. And so I worry that by removing areas, we may be removing the priority from areas that still need priority. I don't know if there's a different way to address that. I also worry that sometimes there may be some private entities that might take advantage of these being economic development priority areas and not necessarily propose plans or projects that address why they're economic development priority areas. So those are my comments. The main thing is I wonder if there's a way to look at poverty at a finer grain than the census tract, so we aren't overlooking areas that might need some sort of attention that wouldn't get it using this method. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
I'm sorry, this is, if I may respond, Chair Fox. Okay, hi, this is Ira Mabel from Planning and Development. So a couple of months ago, I want to say, the City Council adopted the most recent strategic plan for the city. And included in that plan is an initiative to evaluate this map and the criteria that we use for this map. So I am on that team along with Ken Bowers and Pat Young from our department and a couple other staff people from across the city. So we are at the stage of preparing the work plan for how we're going to do that. I think we're all agreed that it will involve some degree of public engagement on, you know, the priorities the city has for economic development and the programs that rely on this map. And so yes, we are talking about what should go in this map. Should there be criteria other than a map? Some other performance-based measures that might be less tied to geography. So that is definitely something that we are working towards and have been authorized by City Council to think about. I think the amendment John's presenting is sort of an interim step just to make sure the data we're using to date is up to date as it can be. But yes, all of your points I think we are considering, and you should hopefully we'll have some recommended changes to this map, you know, in this calendar year, to think about some of the issues you're describing, Commissioner Bennett.
Thanks, Ira. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ira. To follow up on that as well, I'd like to also know what the relationship is to opportunity zones. And then I feel as if this is a very powerful tool that we're not using for anything other than evaluating grants. And so maybe if you could speak, is that team going to address that as well? Is that part of the work?
Yes, so we've definitely talked about all sorts of things. I think, as you can imagine, when you get 10 Bowers on a team, it can get pretty philosophical pretty quick. What is the nature of economic development? So opportunity zones, certainly right now the map does not reflect those at all. That was a fairly recent, a couple of years ago, innovation from the federal level. And I think ultimately, you know, the charge from City Council was to look at the criteria in this map. So we are thinking very carefully about suggestions that we make beyond that. I think regardless, the first step that we're planning on is to do some public engagement with all of the city, and also, you know, specifically soliciting from our economic development partners to really start with, you know, what should the city's values for economic development be? So then we can say, like, is this map meeting those? If not, why not? And so I think as a first step, that should point us to the direction of, you know, do the values we're hearing from the community also align with opportunity zones or not? And therefore, should we be, you know, what's the universe of criteria that staff thinks are appropriate to meet what the community says we should be focusing on, if that makes sense.
That does. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Ira. That's very helpful.
Sure.
Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners? I see Commissioner Miller and then Commissioner Rain.
Yes, I wanted to thank Commissioner Bennett for that comment, and I'm so glad to hear about the council and the city's new work group around this. One of the challenges, as we all know, is obviously we're for economic development in blighted areas generally, but certainly when it comes to housing, that leads to frequently gentrification and displacement of the existing residents. And I think one of the key reasons for that is because the jobs that are attracted and the businesses that are attracted to that area under some of the current policies don't necessarily employ the local workforce. So they're going to attract workforce that is not from that area, which is then obviously going to create opportunities for not necessarily the local residences. So when the work group is addressing this issue in particular, one additional metric to look at could be the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the federal criteria for workforce development. So not just seeing where jobs are generally needed, but jobs that line up with the local KSAs of the workforce that live in that area. So that as one way to tackle the issue of providing economic development in an area without causing massive displacement of the existing residents.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Rains?
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Commissioner Bennett and Miller's comments about a little bit more of a granular level and different approach to this. I just have a question for staff. Just for clarification, there's an 18.9% threshold for these districts, and I'm not sure where that came from, or if they could explain them, this threshold metric for the grants.
Yeah, this is John Anagnost again. So the way that that number is created is that it's 150% of the poverty level for all of Raleigh. So in all of Raleigh, 12.6% of individuals have incomes below the poverty level. And so if we multiply that by 150%, we get that 18.9%. So we could probably, you know, that could probably be part of the discussion in the work group as well. Just how is poverty defined appropriately?
Are there any additional comments from commissioners? With none, I'm comfortable personally. Commissioner Winters, Vice Chair Winters.
Thank you. When we're also talking about the definition of poverty, I would also invite you to look at food desert areas and what the amenities are along that corridor. If what those amenities are, if they're just basically what those amenities are, and what that contributes to the community at large.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. I am personally comfortable with this as an interim step, but I would challenge staff to acknowledge and work with some of the comments that we've heard here today. With that, I would like to offer a motion to approve CP 321 as it is reasonable and in the public interest and consistent with the comprehensive plan, specifically items related to corridor revitalization, resource allocation, small business and underserved areas, and prioritizing investments. Do I have a second? Commissioner Mann?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Is there any additional debate, questions on the motion that's before you at this moment? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of the vote. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Mann,
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
Commissioner Rain,
Aye.
Vice Chair Winters.
Aye. And one more note, I meant to say service providers, not necessarily amenities. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I updated my notes as you were talking. So that motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to the next item, case number Z221. This is a request to rezone approximately 1/2 acre of land to remove the NCOD on property zoned residential 10. This property is located on White Oak Road, just to the east of Glenwood Avenue. This request has not been previously discussed, so we will start with a staff presentation from Jason Harden.
Specifically, the Hayes Barton Baptist Church in that section of the intersection. The property here and the broader area on that portion of the intersection is zoned residential 10. A large part of this area also has the 5 points overlay applied to it. It wasn't applied to the primary church property, which you'll see on an aerial a little bit more clearly in a moment, but it was applied to individual housing lots in this area. Over time, the church has acquired some of those lots and is now seeking to recombine those lots with its primary property. And there's a provision of the overlay district that includes a maximum lot size, and that is the reason for seeking the rezoning. So you see on, and let's go ahead to the next slide and we'll see a closer view of the zoning. So there's 2 parcels and a portion of a third that are the subject of this particular rezoning. It's less than 1/2 acre in total. Again, they're all zoned residential 10 and that would remain. So it does not change the allowed uses or other primary relevant considerations. And you can see a little bit to the south of this is the intersection itself, where there's a node of mixed use zoning. And again, this is residential. So next slide, please. So look at what this looks like on the ground. You can see the primary church building and the existing parking area, and then the homes that are along White Oak Road, which the church owns. And again, there are only, not all of those homes currently have the NCOD applied. So it's just those portions that are outlined in yellow that are the subject of this rezoning. Next slide. So this gets into the details of the overlay district. It does contain a maximum lot size. The effect of that would be to prevent any housing types other than a detached house or a duplex. So it was intended to restrict any other housing types in this area. Also, that's probably the most impactful provision. It also includes a provision about front setbacks and maximum building height of 2 stories and 35 feet. Next slide. So given that the R10 zoning would remain, the change is not significant in at least some of these comparisons. So in terms of density, allowed density, there would be no change. That's still controlled by the underlying R10 zoning, 10 units to the acre. At least on these subject parcels, would not permit any additional units. The only change to setbacks would be that one provision about the front setback, and it relates to the average of setbacks on the block. Doesn't change uses. All residential zoning districts permit uses that are civic uses such as church or other institutions and associated elements such as parking lots. Next slide. So the future land use map designates almost all of this area as institutional, reflecting the presence of the church in that area. That's a typical designation on a larger campus. So the intent of that category is to facilitate the needs of institutional uses within the city. So consistent with that category, in terms of, there's a small section that currently is applied where low density residential is applied to one of the lots. And again, this would not allow any other uses beyond those allowed by the existing zoning that would remain. Next slide. In terms of urban form, only portions that don't front on White Oak Road, don't front on the street, are part of that. It was applied to the overall church property, but also the rezoning would not alter any relevant urban form related requirements. So it's consistent with that designation. Next slide. Consistent policies, again, doesn't change any underlying uses, consistent with that institutional category on the future land use map. It would, if the intended use were ever for housing, it would facilitate more compact housing in different housing types by lifting that restriction on housing types other than attached or detached housing. So consistent with those policies, although the intent here is to expand the parking lot, it certainly in the future, if needs change, could be used for different uses. So next slide. And then one inconsistent policy, infill compatibility. The existing context on this street is residential, and while there's nothing in the rezoning request that would not permit residential development, it also could facilitate a larger surface parking lot on the property, and that is the intended use here. Next slide. So consistent, again, with the future land use map, an urban form map, and overall consistent with the comprehensive plan and its intention to support institutional uses within the city. Next slide. No outstanding issues on the materials that are attached to the agenda. There was a note about the Raleigh Historic District Commission review. So that has happened in the interim. They reviewed this last week and did not oppose the proposed rezoning. So I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Next, I'd like to hear from Isabelle Maddox representing the applicant. The applicant has a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Members of the Planning Commission, Isabelle Maddox here. I'm here today with David Haley, pastor of Hayes Barton Baptist Church, and David Brown, landscape architect of Klein Design. I'm here this morning in representation of his Barton Baptist Church, most of which you, can you hear me? Are y'all hearing me?
We
Hello?
can, Miss Maddox, you're a little choppy, but it's
Okay.
coming through.
Okay, I'm sorry. It seemed like it might be. Okay, I'll try to speak a little bit louder. Most of you are probably aware of Hayes Barton Baptist Church. It's at 5 Points where Whitaker Mill, Glenwood Avenue, and White Oak Road come together. Slide 1, you can see the overall layout. And over the years, the church has acquired some adjacent properties, you know, when those were offered for sale with an eye towards possible future expansion when appropriate. The older acquisitions were acquired before the 5 Points East NCOD was applied in 2004. 2 of the more recent acquisitions were encumbered with the NCOD, creating sort of a snaggletooth effect, as you can see in slide 3, if you'll go to slide 3. Then in 2005, the city actually permitted 2 recombinations, recombining portions of the NCOD into the main church tract, and that's slides 4 and 5. You can see that piece, those 2 pieces have the NCOD on them, but they're part of the main church tract. So that creates non-conforming lots, which I think this rezoning would rectify. In 2019, 2020, the church was doing planning to trying to modify its parking lot to create a new driveway, a covered drive, and they ran into some issues with the city, which did not allow any recombination because they said it would exceed the NCOD maximum lot size, and that sort of stymied their development plans. And we decided that rezoning was probably our best path. But first, I'd like to call on Dr. David Haley, the pastor, to sort of tell you a little bit about where the church is and its challenges. Dr. Haley?
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you to all of you on the Planning Commission for just these few moments to share with you a little bit about what we're hoping to do. As Isabel noted, over the years, since the 1980s, our church began to acquire houses along White Oak Road with an eye toward the future needs of the church. And over the years, we have maintained these as rental properties until we could best determine how to meet the church's needs. And as most of you probably recall, in 2018, we announced our plans for expansion to the neighborhood, and we were met with a rather significant amount of resistance. And so as a result of that resistance, we spent the next year or more meeting with and listening to the concerns of our neighbors in an effort to reach an appropriate solution that would be acceptable to them and meet the church's growing needs. And we're very, very pleased that in 2019, we were joined by our neighbors in making a public announcement that we had achieved this objective. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about what this understanding encompasses. Basically, what we're wanting to do and what we've agreed to do with our neighbors is that we would preserve 3 of the 6 church-owned homes on White Oak, and we would remove the other 3. Now, the 3 houses to be removed will provide much needed space to provide greater accessibility to our church facility for both our senior members and our younger families with children, as it will feature a covered drop-off point near a new elevator in our building, and it will have expanded handicap parking and better pedestrian access. This area is used primarily by our senior adults and our families with young children. So this new access point is going to be very much appreciated by these segments in our congregation, and will be very much appreciated. The 3 remaining homes on White Oak Road will become an important part of our church's mission program by renovating them and using them to provide affordable housing to low-income families. And so today we're asking for your support in our efforts to move forward with these improvements by attaining a single unified zoning for our entire church campus. We've come a long way in this process, and it's been a difficult and challenging process, acquiring the property, negotiating with our neighbors, and most recently weaving our way through all the requirements of the city of Raleigh. But thanks to the assistance of many in our community, and thanks in advance to, I believe, what you'll be doing, we believe we're almost there. So we hope that we can move forward with this. We believe that it will meet the needs of maintaining the historic integrity of our neighborhood. It will meet the needs of providing needed affordable housing to some of our most vulnerable in the community, and it will meet the needs of our senior members and our families with young children. So you might say it'll be a win-win-win for all of us. So thank you again for the opportunity to share this with you, and I'll turn it back over to Isabelle.
Thank you, Dr. Haley. So just to sort of wrap up, the important things to remember are it was never intended that the NCOD apply to the church or to the small lots that the church owned at that time. They were not brought into the NCOD. It's also important to remember that in 2005, the city ignored the NCOD provisions and permitted areas to be recombined, creating non-conforming lots, which this rezoning will fix. Importantly, the church negotiated an agreement with the neighborhood about these properties, which included 2 of the lots in this rezoning request. And this rezoning does not in any way undo that agreement. It just allows the church to move forward with the agreed expansion plans. And if you'll go to slide 7, you'll see our proposed new site plan. And at this time, I'd like to call on David Brown to kind of go through that site plan with you. David?
Planning Commission members, the image in front of you is a schematic site plan that was developed with input directly from our neighbors. You'll note significantly behind the main church building a circular drop-off. There's also a covered canopy that Dr. Haley mentioned. That's a key component and a big feature of this project. What this also does is provide us some much needed accessible handicap parking close to a building entrance. It connects to the other parking areas on the site and corrects some older long-standing items that need to be updated. I may stop for a moment, see if there are any questions of the site plan. Hearing none, I will send this back to Isabelle, please.
Thank you, David. And so I just want to clarify one point. We did go to Raleigh Historic Development Commission last week. They did recommend approval of this case. And we did agree with them that we would photograph. There's one building that will be removed that is in the historic neighborhood. We agreed to photograph that and provide those photographs to the Historic Development Commission. And I do want to make a point. This is a general use case. It's not a conditional case. We cannot add conditions, but we do believe the agreement that's been previously struck with the neighborhood sort of takes the place of conditions. And we think all in all, this involves a balancing test, trying to find a balance between neighborhood conservation, allowing a church member, which is a member of the neighborhood, to accommodate its church growth and its more vulnerable populations. And we think this strikes the right balance. I also will note this is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. So we would appreciate your support, and all of us are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. There's no one signed up to speak on this request, so I will shift over to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Does anyone have a question or a comment? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Please remember to be recognized before you make a motion, and the motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. A commissioner who wishes to second the motion should raise their hand and be recognized. Commissioner O'Haver.
I'd like to make a motion. Move to recommend approval of zoning case Z 3-2-21. The rezoning request is reasonable in the public interest and is supported by these specific policies in the comprehensive land use plan. LU 1.2 future land use map and zoning consistency, LU 2.2 compact development, and policy H 1.8 zoning for housing.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. Do we have a second? Commissioner Miller?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner O'Haver and a second by Commissioner Miller. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Vote.
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Mann,
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
Commissioner Raines,
Aye.
Vice Chair Winters.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Before we leave this one, I do want to make a note and say I really commend the Hayes Barton Baptist Church and Dr. Haley specifically for working on a compromise. That's really how it should be done. Thank you very much, sir. Moving on to item E.3, that's case number Z1221. This is a request to rezone approximately 14 acres of land from residential 4 to residential mixed use 3 stories conditional use. The property is located on Barwell Road, north of Rock Quarry Road. The request has not been previously discussed, so we will start